This guy live streamed his girlfriend's all while his followers were cheering him on and donating actual money. This is thoughts he went by replay online, and he was one of those really toxic live streamers. His entire channel was literally just humiliating women for clicks and views, but this time he took it so far it angers me and makes me so sick. He was dating this girl named Valentina. She's 28 and pregnant. And one day on live stream they got into this really heated argument, so his disgusting chat dared him to punish her. And that's exactly what this monster did. He physically dragged her outside. He left her there like she was just some object. For hours, you guys, she begged to come back inside. She screamed for someone to help her, but he completely ignored her cries. Even laughing about it on camera, like her suffering was peak entertainment. And when he finally had the decency to bring her back inside, she wasn't breathing. He picked up her lifeless body on camera and said, "She's dead, guys. No pulse. She's not breathing." And the live stream, it did not stop. People sat there watching her lifeless body on camera, lying there while he panicked, while he paced the room, still crying, still asking for donations. I have absolutely zero words for how messed up this is. Sass was arrested, obviously, but he only got 6 years in prison. 6 years. For murder. But he claimed he did nothing wrong. Crazy. And Valentina's autopsy later confirmed the horrifying truth. She died from hypothermia, a blunt head injury, and multiple bruises all over her body. So this wasn't just cold weather, this was straight up torture streamed for likes, followers, and money. And I think what haunts me the most isn't just what this psychopath did, it was the amount of people who watched and did absolutely nothing. People commented, people donated money, and actually laughed in the chat. A pregnant woman was dying on live and nobody left the stream to call for help. The internet keeps on rewarding the worst people with the most views and money, and women like Valentina, they pay the ultimate price. So please never be the person who watches and then walks away. If you're still here, thank you for actually caring. You guys are like my crime solving besties. So just know you're not just watching, you're the reason why these victim stories are still remembered. I love you guys all so much. I will see you in my next video. Group hug.
A Utah sheriff's deputy was stalked and killed by her own father, and he's now on the run. 25-year-old Marbella Martinez was found dead on August 1st in the Tooele home that she shared with her father, and the events leading up to her murder are sickening. Marbella had just been sworn in as a corrections officer with the Salt Lake City Police in January, and things were going good for her. Until her dad, 54-year-old Hector Martinez, started exhibiting really creepy behavior. Hector started becoming really obsessive and controlling over Marbella, and he would bombard her with texts that authorities are now saying seem more like a jealous lover than a father. In February, Marbella found a bag of her underwear and feminine hygiene products in her dad's room. Hector then started putting up hidden cameras throughout the house, and in July, escalated to putting a tracking device on Marbella's car while she was out of town. When she returned, he tracked her to Bates Canyon, where she was on a hiking date with a romantic partner. After this confrontation, Marbella moved into a hotel for a few days before returning home on July 31st, and sadly, this would be the day that he would kill her. After returning home, Hector strangled Marbella to death, and then immediately after texted his twin brother saying, quote, "My brother, you know how much I love you. I made a big mistake, an unforgivable sin. Now I'm too scared and I don't know what to do. I think I will never come back." End quote. To try and destroy some of the evidence, Hector deleted a portion of the security footage at his home, but he left behind a massive digital footprint, including the text he sent his brother as well as the location on his and Marbella's phone. Marbella's body was found on August 1st after the Tooele police conducted a welfare check, and she was found on her bed with obvious claw marks on her face and neck. After he killed his own daughter, Hector threw her phone alongside I-80 and then went to the Salt Lake City International Airport, where he flew to California and then Texas. He was then caught on CCTV going through customs in an undisclosed country using his twin brother's ID to check in. After this, he vanished, and as of today, his whereabouts remain unknown. It was discovered that in the days leading up to the murder, Hector used Marbella's credit card to withdraw $1,000. Although he remains missing, he was recently charged with murder along with a ton of other charges. Please keep your eyes open for this man, as he could be anywhere by now, and contact authorities if you have any information.
This journalist was essayed by over 200 men right after the camera battery died.
Been waiting for. They came here day after day. This is about freedom. Stop!
Laura Logans was a well-known journalist for CBS News. On February 11th of 2011, Laura and her CBS crew were in Egypt because at the time the president Hosni Mubarak was resigning. Laura was covering the celebrations in Tahrir Square because a lot of people were celebrating, chanting, and just happy that they had their freedom. As Laura and her crew were filming it all, suddenly the camera battery died, and that's when things started to change. Men started to gather around Laura, and suddenly she was separated from her CBS crew. Next thing she knows, she was being surrounded by 200 to 300 men and is being essayed by flagpoles and sticks for 25 minutes. They tore off her clothes and started to take photos with their cell phones. Laura's body was being pulled in different directions, and when they were pulling her hair, it was coming out in chunks. She was dragged towards a fence where a group of women were camping. They saw her and were able to pull her out and save her. A group of soldiers saw what was going on, so they started hitting the men with their batons, and luckily Laura survived. Once Laura arrived back to the United States, she was kept in the hospital for 4 days. Since they didn't know the identity of these men because there were so many of them, they weren't able to prosecute any of them. Despite how traumatic this was for Laura, she decided to come forward with her story so that maybe it could help other victims in the same situation. Although the memory will never disappear, she states she is proud for breaking the silence of what some female journalists experience but never talk about.
I wish that I could go back in time to this photo and tell Skylar Neese to stay home, because just moments after this image was taken, her 2 childhood best friends would brutally stab her to death, all because they didn't like her anymore. I don't think that I've ever been more affected by a true crime case, and I remember seeing the Dr. Phil episode on this when I was around 16, just like Skylar was when she was murdered, and it had such a deep impact on me that I've never been able to forget it. On July 5th, 2012, Skylar returned to her home in Morgantown, West Virginia after her evening shift at Wendy's. She lived with her family in the James Place apartments. A little after midnight on July 6th, security footage from the apartment complex caught Skylar sneaking out of her bedroom window and getting into a car. At the time, nobody knew who the car belonged to, but from what we know now, the car belonged to one of her childhood best friends, 16-year-old Sheila Eddy. Also inside the car was another one of Skylar's best friends, Rachel Schoaf, who was also 16 years old. Everything indicated that Skylar thought she was going to come back home. She left her phone charger behind and left her window propped open, but she had no idea what was really about to happen to her. After driving to a wooded remote area in Pennsylvania, the girls got out and started talking and hanging out. Then out of nowhere, Rachel and Sheila counted to 3 and began stabbing Skylar to death. She was ultimately stabbed over 50 times, and they tried burying her but couldn't dig deep enough. So they covered Skylar's body in rocks and branches and then left her there. Now when Skylar wasn't home the next morning, her parents reported her missing to police. But what's infuriating is the fact that they considered her a runaway, so they wouldn't issue an Amber Alert until 48 hours later. While they had to wait, Skylar's family started searching for her and posting missing person flyers around town. And what's absolutely disgusting is that Sheila, who was so close to Skylar and her family since they were childhood best friends, even helped look for her and distribute her missing person flyers. Sheila and Rachel then began posting on Twitter saying how much they were worried about Skylar and how they hoped that she would be found alive soon. Like, look at all of these posts. It's sickening what these girls did, and looking at these tweets knowing what we know now, it's just so twisted. So when police eventually did get involved, they reviewed the security footage at the apartment complex and found that the car belonged to Sheila, so they took her in for questioning. Sheila admitted to picking Skylar up with Rachel at around 11 p.m. to drive around and smoke some weed, but she insisted that they dropped her off at midnight down the road from her house so that she could sneak back in. But investigators could tell that she was lying, and this was confirmed via the timestamps on the apartment security footage, as well as video footage from a nearby convenience store. That and all of their phone records, so nothing Sheila was saying was adding up. 6 months later, and after intense interviews from authorities and major suspicions from the community, Rachel had a nervous breakdown and confessed everything. She confessed how she plotted with Sheila to kill Skylar, and this was all because they didn't like her anymore and just didn't want to be friends with her. She led police to Skylar's body, which was found less than 30 miles from her home. It's so heartbreaking that Skylar laid there for 6 months just waiting to be found. Meanwhile, her 2 closest friends were posting on Twitter and going about their daily lives. Rachel was quickly arrested, and authorities did everything they could to try and get Sheila to incriminate herself. They even had Rachel wear a wire in hopes that they would catch her slipping, but she never did. Eventually, they searched her home in the car that she was driving that night, and they found Skylar's blood in the trunk. After this, Sheila was arrested too. At the trial, Rachel expressed remorse and apologized to Skylar's family, but other things were uncovered that kind of proved otherwise. In the days leading up to her murder, Skylar posted on Twitter about how she and the other 2 were fighting, and she even made this final sinister tweet that read, quote, "You doing shit like this is why I can never fully trust you." End quote. And it also came to light that in the months leading up to the murder, other students at the school overheard Sheila and Rachel talking about the murder plot, but they thought that they were just joking, so it was never reported to police. Both girls were tried as adults. Rachel pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 30 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 10 years. Sheila, who has never shown any remorse, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 15 years. Under West Virginia law, a juvenile offender is required to have a possibility of parole on a life sentence, even in violent crimes. Rachel got less time because she was the one to confess and cooperated with authorities. Both Sheila and Rachel are still being held at the Lakin Correctional Center. In May of 2023, Rachel had a parole hearing in which she still expressed remorse for the killing, but this time she also said, "I made one mistake. That doesn't make me a bad person." She also gave more insight into why they murdered Skylar, and this time she finally gave the true motive. Rachel explained that she was in a romantic relationship with Sheila, and that caused tension between them and Skylar, which is why they decided to kill her. Long story short, short, she was denied parole, as she should be, and her next parole hearing is next summer. Sheila's parole hearing is in May of 2028, and I personally believe that she should never get out of prison. She has shown no remorse, and I honestly believe that she would kill again if something made her mad enough. The only good thing that has come out of this is Skylar's Law, which her family has pushed to get passed. Skylar's Law modified the West Virginia Amber Alert plan, and now authorities have to issue immediate public announcements when any child is reported missing or in danger, regardless if they are believed to have been kidnapped or not. But nothing has ever been the same for Morgantown, and to this day, they are still haunted by Skylar's murder.
A doctor who was killing hundreds of his patients in a decades-long killing spree. Some say that he's the worst serial killer in UK history, while other people believe that he is the most prolific serial killer ever in the entire world, as it's believed that he is the highest number of confirmed victims of any other serial killer in modern history. This is the case of Harold Shipman, also known as Dr. Death. This case really begins, like so many others, when it comes to serial killers. Whether we're talking about Ed Gein, who was in love with his, or Ed Kemper, who deeply hated his, we must first start with Harold's mother. Harold grew up in poverty. They did not have a lot of money. Harold's mother was a hard-to-please lady, mostly because she wanted better for her children. She was really strict about her children working hard, studying hard, getting an education, getting a good job, and getting out of poverty. She wanted better for them. And Harold was her favorite of all of her children because he was the most likely seeming to do so. Harold was very smart. He worked hard, studied hard, and even got a scholarship to a prestigious private school. Harold did not come from the same world that his peers did at private school. He was not the same kind of guy, but he tried to pretend that he was. Think of like Jenny Humphrey in Gossip Girl. He tried to act very posh. He was very snobby. He acted like he was better than everyone else. He definitely had an inflated ego. He was a narcissist. It definitely developed into quite a god complex, as you'll see later on in his adulthood. His peers did not really like him. He did not really have friends except for his own mother, who was his best friend. Harold and his mother were very close, and that's why when he was a teenager and his mother was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, his entire world was turned upside down. At only 17 years old, Harold was his mother's full-time caregiver. He was by her side 24/7 up until the day she died, which is actually what inspired him to go to medical school and become a doctor. As a 19-year-old college freshman, Harold began dating a 16-year-old girl named Primrose, and shortly after they started dating, he got her pregnant, which in 1966 was a big no-no. Harold's own father even told him that he was glad that his mother was dead so she didn't have to see him get a girl pregnant out of wedlock, because she would have been so deeply hurt and disappointed. So Harold marries the girl. He marries the girl. She's only 16 years old, 5 months pregnant, and they went on to have 3 more children. After graduation, Harold became a general practitioner where he was loved by his patients but loathed by his coworkers because of his arrogant, snotty attitude. And it was at this job that Harold was caught abusing his prescription pad to feed his substance addiction. Yep, Harold was an addict, and he had been using for years. He actually used every 2 hours, even while he was treating patients. And when he was caught, he did not even lose his medical license. He was fined a couple £100 and was sent to rehab for a couple months. After leaving rehab, he continued to practice medicine in a different town and then opened up his own clinic. Dr. Harold Shipman was a beloved and sought-after doctor. He was a family man. He was a pillar of the community. He was well-liked and a well-known man. And that's why it was so difficult when people started to realize that there was something not quite right. He actually had 10 times the amount of cremation requests than the average clinic in the area, and his older female patients were dropping like flies. They were passing away unexpectedly with no clear cause of death. They were found in their homes, sitting on their couch, either found by their doctor, Harold Shipman, or were found shortly after he stopped by their homes for a routine home visit. It was clear that this man was either the worst doctor ever, the most unlucky doctor in history, or there was something far more sinister at play here. Some concerned citizens actually brought this to the attention of the police, but were actually warned not to accuse a pillar of their community of something so terrible with no concrete evidence, and the case was closed. And in the months that followed, more of the patients of Harold Shipman continued to die. 6 months after this, one of Harold's patients, an 81-year-old woman named Kathleen Grundy, was found dead in her home. She was sitting on her couch, like all of his other patients, found dead in their house on their couch. It was actually like right after Harold had been at her house to do some blood work for her, blood work that he actually never sent to get tested at a lab. Kathleen Grundy was a beloved member of this community. She was actually the former mayor, and she was very, very wealthy. After she passed, they tried to get all of her affairs in order. They took a look at her will, and her will had been modified 2 weeks before her passing. In her will, she left absolutely nothing to her daughter, who she loved very much, but she left everything, absolutely everything, to her doctor, Harold Shipman. The will was sketchy, everything about it. There were inaccuracies all throughout it, grammatical errors, and her signature did not match her actual signature. And they actually determined that this will had been written on Harold's typewriter. So they exhumed Kathleen's body, which is such a difficult thing for family members, but at this point they truly do believe that she is a murder victim. They do an autopsy and a toxicology report, and that's how it was determined that she passed away from a lethal amount of diamorphine, I'll put it on the screen. She had been murdered by lethal injection. And then the police are like, oh my God, maybe he has been killing his patients after all. It was really, really hard for them to determine how many victims this man actually had. You can't do a toxicology report on every single patient he's ever had that passed away. Many of them are, decomposing. And also many of them were cremated because Harold Shipman urged a lot of his patients' loved ones to cremate his patients to get rid of evidence. But there was 14 patients that they could exhume that had recently passed away under Harold Shipman's care, and all 14 of them came back having passed away by lethal injection. Harold was charged and found guilty of all 15 counts of murder and was sentenced to 15 life sentences without parole, which is apparently really uncommon to be sentenced to life without parole in the UK. So now they try to determine how many victims does this man actually have. He's been a doctor for decades. They start looking at cases where his patients were older females, passed away unexpectedly, were found in their homes on their couch, either by Harold himself or shortly after he visited them for a home visit. And they found 215 women that they believe 100% fully are victims of Harold Shipman. Another 35 that they are pretty sure were victims of him, and another at least 4 dozen that they suspect were victims of Harold Shipman. Meaning that Harold Shipman has 250 or more victims dating all the way back to when he first started working in medicine 27 years earlier. But why? Why did this man who loved his mother, he was crushed and devastated, sitting by her side and watched her slowly die, then go into the homes of his patients who loved him and trusted him? He went into their homes and these women all resembled his mother in some kind of way. And then he watched them slowly die by his own hand over 250 times. There's no motive, and we will never get answers by Harold Shipman himself because less than 2 years into his jail sentence, he unalived himself in his jail cell. His final act of playing God. I am so interested to get your guys' take on this case. I'm going to be reading all of my comments on this one. Why do you think Harold Shipman, who loved his mother and sat next to her every single day and watched her slowly die of cancer, then go on to do the same thing to hundreds of women who are around the same age as his mother? One of his victims, I didn't even mention this, was a cancer patient who was starting to get better. Why did he put all these other people through the same thing that he sat through with his mother? Really, really interested to get your guys' take on this case. It's so confusing, so frustrating. And while you're there, let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
She turned to social media, specifically TikTok, to talk about her struggles, to open up about her family, what they were facing with, struggling with, and then she murdered her entire family. Guys, I hate it probably just as much as you do, if not more, when I have to give my usual warning, but in this case, I do. There are children involved, so if you think that listening to this is gonna harm your mental health in any way, please skip this video, take care of yourselves, and I will see you in my next one. I love you. Today's case took place in Madbury, New Hampshire. There in a 4-bedroom house lived 34-year-old Emily Long, her husband, 48-year-old Ryan Long, their 8-year-old Parker, 6-year-old Ryan, and the baby of the family, their 3-year-old son. Ryan, the husband, was a school psychiatrist for the Oyster River Cooperative School District and also worked part-time in Plymouth State University. Emily worked in the restaurant business. She had been working there as a director of operations since 2018 up until last summer. So at the time of this case, she was not employed. And up until April of 2025, the Long family was living the kind of life that everyone hopes for. They were looked at as a happy family of 5 who had this beautiful life they created together, living in a beautiful home, and by all accounts, they were very happy. But all of that changed when Ryan, the husband, was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer earlier this year, and of course, that took such a massive toll on the entire family. It turned their entire world upside down. The normal they were used to was no longer, and they now had to learn how to live with this grief that no family should ever have to face. The diagnosis rocked their world, and Emily turned to social media to talk about her husband, her family, their story, grief, and every hardship and struggle that they were trying to navigate through. She started posting videos on TikTok, and she would talk about the treatments that Ryan was going through, how hard it was not only for him, but also for her and their kids, watching his health slowly decline. In a video captioned, "Watch me brag about my husband for 7 minutes," she went into detail about their love story, their relationship, about how Ryan was the best husband that she could ever ask for. He was her rock. She talked about everything that he taught her on how to be the best partner, and of course also touched on the diagnosis and talked about how different life looked for them now. But she mentioned that Ryan was very good at keeping his spirits high even in the darkest of times. She also often talked about how they were doing the best that they could to try and prepare the kids for the loss of their father. And over time, she started receiving a lot of love and support. Her audience kept growing, and she would open up about her personal mental health struggles, about depression, often talking about how she felt sorry for herself. And she built such a community that was really, truly so loving and caring towards their entire family. On TikTok, she posted around 80 videos, and referring to herself, she wrote, "New Hampshire mom of 3, brain cancer wife, my digital diary, it's cheaper than therapy." The last video she posted was titled "Making a Change," and in one of her latest posts, she wrote, "Okay, I'm making strides to get better. All I want to do is hide under a blanket with my kids, but that isn't healthy for them and it's not healthy for me. Today I decided to make a conscious effort to shift my mindset. I'm getting out of this depression whether I want to or not." That brings us to Monday, August 18th of 2025. That day, authorities showed up to the Long family household after receiving a welfare check request. When they entered the home, they found the bodies of Ryan Long, Emily Long, 8-year-old Parker, and 6-year-old Ryan, deceased. All 4 of them had clear weapon wounds, and Ryan's death, as well as the children's, were immediately ruled a homicide. Ryan had multiple gunshot wounds, and both of the kids had a single wound to the head. The 3-year-old baby was found alone in the house, unharmed. All 4 of them were pronounced deceased at the scene just after 8 p.m. Authorities believe that in the early hours of the morning, Emily Long grabbed a weapon from the house, used it on the husband, their 2 kids, and unalived herself shortly after. An absolute tragedy. My heart goes out to the little 3-year-old baby that's the only one surviving out of their entire family and is now being cared for by other family members. But even just imagining the beginning of the trauma that this poor little boy is going to have to deal with for the rest of his life is so sad. Now, of course, the question everyone has, what was the motive? And mental health comes into play here massively. Because of the struggles the family was facing, because of the kind of videos that Emily was making, flat out stating that she felt herself withering away. But it's also interesting because you could argue that she was pleading for help, but in the same breath, you could say that she wasn't, because even in some of her videos, she talked about therapy, how she didn't want it, how she felt she wasn't ready for it. Even saying that one of her close friends was a therapist and was offering her help, but she didn't want it. And I know cancer is the worst thing in the world. It tears so many families apart, but that does not excuse what she did, not at all. And I think that's something we can all agree on. She took 3 innocent lives of the people who loved her most in this world, in the place where they were supposed to feel the safest, in their own home. There's also the topic of conversation of Emily's employer. Remember I said she wasn't working at the time? Well, her employer on August 11th went to authorities to report suspicions that Emily had been stealing money from the business. The owner stated, quote, "I felt I had no other option than to go to law enforcement. We noticed there were a lot of handwritten checks being deposited into her bank account," end quote. In June of 2025, he started noticing that a lot of money was being missing, and he noticed the numerous checks paid out to Emily herself. He confronted her, and he stated that she didn't really have an explanation, and then he asked her for 3 months worth of bank statements, and she did provide the bank statements in early August, but the records she provided showed that they were either tampered with or they just had pages of information that was just missing. Emily's boss boss had valid reasons to suspect that Emily had stolen $660,000 from the business throughout the last 2 to 3 years. And of course, we don't know. There's no way of knowing if that did or did not play a part in her motive, but her boss has stated since then that 1, he has no idea where the money went or what she used it on, but that 2, he has no plan to take legal action to recover the stolen money. Instead, he wants it to go to Emily's 3-year-old surviving son. He has said, quote, anything that's left of it should go to that child. He deserves all of it. It's not fair to him. He didn't make this happen and he didn't deserve this, end quote. A tragedy such as this one will never ever make sense, and it's so heartbreaking to watch it from afar. All of my love goes out to everyone that has been left in this difficult position to grieve and try to make sense of what this new normal looks like for them. A GoFundMe page has been started to support the youngest family, the only surviving family of the Long family, and I will leave the link to it in the comment section. But that is all I have for today's video. Thank you guys for spending time with me today. I hope you're having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
He's the most infamous serial killer in the entire world. What is it about Ted Bundy that continues to intrigue people decades later? Today I'm going to try and fit in as many details I can about the life and crimes of Ted Bundy in one video, while also hopefully sharing something that maybe you did not know about the most well-known serial killer in the entire world. Ted Bundy was born November 24th, 1946 to a young unwed mother, and in the 1940s that was a big no-no. To avoid further shame on the family, Ted Bundy was raised by his grandparents and grew up believing that his biological mom was actually his older sister. The thing that's different about Ted Bundy than other well-known serial killers is that there was nothing that happened, as far as we know, in Ted Bundy's life that made him this way. He was a born psychopath with disturbing behaviors that started as early as 3 years old. Like on one afternoon, while Ted Bundy's aunt was taking a nap, she woke up and was completely surrounded in a circle of kitchen knives, with a little 3-year-old Ted Bundy just standing over her smiling like something out of a horror movie. Since he was a born psychopath, as a child, he was unable to feel and express emotions the way that other people can. He was seen as different, quiet, distant, shy, and he was bullied for it. As a young teen boy, he began committing petty crimes, as well as being a peeping Tom, and I feel like everyone we've talked about in the past week has been a peeping Tom. When he was 14 years old, he was a paper boy, and one day an 8-year-old girl disappeared from the same neighborhood that Ted Bundy's paper route was on. Her father says that Ted Bundy was stalking around their house only moments before she vanished, and unfortunately, this little girl would never be found. And although it's not confirmed, many people believe that this is Ted Bundy's first ever victim, and he began killing when he was only 14 years old. And then miraculously, after this 8-year-old girl disappeared, Ted Bundy gained confidence. His entire personality changed. He was confident and charming, maybe because he just got away with murder. Ted Bundy was smart, but definitely not as smart as he thought he was. He had an inflated ego and thought that he was better than everyone else. In college, Ted Bundy majored in psychology. There's a bit of irony for you, and here's some more irony. At one point, he worked for a hotline that people would call when they wanted to unalive themselves, so he helped talk people out of dying. Totally ironic. He also volunteered on a committee that was against SA violence, and there he helped write a pamphlet on SA prevention. A serial killer who was also at this point a serial R-worder helping prevent SA. Ted Bundy also studied law and also worked in politics at one point, with dreams of being the president of the United States. Can you imagine that? A psychopath working in politics. And it was while he was working in politics that he traveled a lot and was able to commit murders in different jurisdictions and different states. It is really hard to determine when Ted Bundy began his killing spree. A lot of people believe that his first ever victim was when he was 14 years old with that 8-year-old girl, while other people believe it was in 1974 with his first confirmed victims, while other people believe it started back in the 1960s, because that's the thing about Ted Bundy. Everywhere he went, beautiful young women were disappearing or winding up deceased. It was also around this time that Ted Bundy got his first ever girlfriend. It was his first love. Although we know that he is unable to feel love, this woman was beautiful and from a very wealthy, powerful, successful family. So although he did not love her, he loved the idea of her and what she could offer him. This woman ultimately ended up rejecting Ted Bundy, and then after this, all of his victims had a striking resemblance to this first girlfriend. He also had a second girlfriend, which is his more well-known girlfriend. She was a single mother named Liz. At one point, he was dating both of these women and was engaged to both of these women without the other one knowing. His first confirmed victims were in 1974. The homes of beautiful young women were being broken into in the middle of the night. They were being found beaten, essayed, and unalived by Ted Bundy. And then quickly, he began to escalate his crimes, kidnapping women in broad daylight with one of his many ruses. He would get women to trust him by pretending to be injured. He would have like his arm in like a sling or be carrying crutches and ask women to help him put something in his car. He would also pretend to be a police officer and sometimes have a British accent. He would have all of these characters so he could like get away with his crimes, but he would tell people his name was Ted, like his real name. It was also around this time that his crimes began to escalate in an even more vile, disgusting way. He began revisiting the dump sites where he would put his victims and essay them after death, far into their decomposition. And this is the man that y'all were thirsting over in the 1980s, I do not forget. But since he was kidnapping all these women in broad daylight, there was a lot of eyewitnesses that, would see this man named Ted driving Ted's car, and they even had police sketches that looked a lot like Ted. So people in Ted's life that worked with him, and even his girlfriend Liz, started to be like, hey, Ted, you kind of look like this guy Ted that they're suspecting of being like a serial killer. Isn't that weird? The jig was up for Ted Bundy in Seattle, so he moved to Utah, where he began killing again. Luckily, in Utah, one of Ted's victims was able to escape and was able to identify Ted Bundy as the man who kidnapped her and essayed her. He was found guilty for this and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. He was then sent to Colorado to go on trial for a murder that they believed he committed there. And in Colorado, he decided during this trial that he was going to defend himself and be his own lawyer with his limited knowledge he had on the law. This granted Ted Bundy unsupervised access to the courtroom's library, where he jumped out of a 2-story window, ran off, and escaped for 6 days before being found. And then he attempted to escape again, but unfortunately this time he was far more successful. He cut a small hole in the ceiling of his cell. He lost 35 pounds so he could fit through the hole. From there, he stole the clothing of a prison guard and just walked out the front door. Before anyone even knew he was missing, he was halfway across the country traveling to Florida. At this point, it had been 2 years since he last killed someone, and he said that he was going to go on a frenzy. In the middle of the night, he broke into the sorority house at Florida State University, where about 30 young girls were sleeping with plans of massacring all of them. He brutally attacked 4 young girls, leaving 2 dead before he got spooked and just fled the scene. He ran only a few blocks away before breaking into the home of another young woman and brutally attacking her as well. About a month later, he kidnapped a 12-year-old girl from a junior high school. He essayed her and unalived her before he was eventually caught. He was caught driving a stolen car, driving erratically down the road. This time, he was arrested for a 3rd and final time. He went on trial again. He was his own lawyer again. It was actually the first trial to ever be televised nationally, and it was a media circus. Ted Bundy had a lot of adoring fans and female fans and different suitors because he was so attractive and charming. And ladies, I mean this by the bottom of my heart, as a whole, we need to be having some higher standards because this is the most below looking average man I've ever seen in my entire life. This is absolutely disgusting, but it was actually during his trial for killing 12-year-old Kimberly Leach that he proposed to one of the women that were obsessed with him. Apparently, under state law, since he proposed to this woman in a court in front of a judge, they were like married by law apparently and were able to have conjugal visits, and he got her pregnant. He was ultimately found guilty of all charges and sentenced to death row, where he for years maintained his innocence and tried to appeal multiple times, but when that did not work, it was time for plan B. Ted Bundy began to confess, and this is how we know like the limited knowledge that we do know on his amount of victims. His thought process was if he slowly began to confess to different murders, that they would postpone his execution date, which is such a double-edged sword because on one hand, of course, you want that information and you want to bring closure to families, but on the other hand, you don't want to let him win. Ultimately, they chose to execute him on January 24th, 1989, and all of his secrets died with him. By the end of his life, he confessed to 36 murders, but experts have tracked unsolved crimes fitting his MO with his own tracks, and they believe that he has upwards of 100 or more victims. I'm really interested to get your guys' take on this case. If you guys agree with executing him, even though he probably had more information that could bring closure to the victims, do you think it was justified so he did not win? Also, was I able to tell you anything about Ted Bundy that you guys did not already know? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
She murdered a man who was violently sexually assaulting her, and yet she is serving a life sentence in prison. This is a case that will make you furious, and it has so many people divided. Did she commit an act of murder, or was this an act of self-defense? I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Filip Jaskowicz. Martina Ogonowska was born in Poland, and she was raised within a family where witnessing domestic violence would be a daily occurrence. Growing up, she would witness her father abusing her mother almost every single day. When she was 12 years old, Martina, her mother, and her brother all fled from Poland, coming to the UK just so they could escape her father's violence. The family lived in Peterborough, where unfortunately Martina found it very difficult to fit in. She could barely speak English, and this made her a prime target for the bullies within her secondary school. She also really struggled getting her education. When she was 14, Martina got talking to an older man on Facebook. This man was also Polish, and so she thought she was building a friendship with someone who she had some common ground with. However, she had no idea that she was actually being groomed by this older man. When they eventually met in real life, this man got 14-year-old Martina drunk before he proceeded to sexually assault and R-word her, which left Martina absolutely traumatized. She confided in one of her only friends who aided her in making a report to the police, who did absolutely nothing. They closed the case on this man after he eventually admitted that him and Martina did have sexual intercourse. However, he claimed that he didn't know that Martina was a minor. If the police bothered to look into Martina's Facebook page, the main platform where the two would speak, they would see that she had plenty of photos on wearing a school uniform, and that her date of birth listed her as being under the age of 16. If they looked into the man, they would have seen that he had an extensive criminal record back in Poland, and yet they did none of that, and he walked away with a slap on the wrist. This was absolutely devastating for Martina, and it had a catastrophic effect on her mental health. She started skiving off of school, running away, and began self-harming. It was later discovered that she had developed PTSD from this entire ordeal. On the 18th of October 2018, a now 18-year-old Martina is a single mom to a 2-year-old daughter. On this day, she was introduced to 23-year-old Filip Jaskowicz through mutual friends, and seemingly they hit it off. There was an initial attraction to one another, and they had something which could have developed into a relationship. However, only days after meeting, Martina would murder Filip. On the 20th of October, Martina and a couple of her friends were celebrating another friend's birthday before they decided to head out for a night on the town. Around 4 AM, she was refused entry back into a nightclub because she was so drunk, and so Martina and a couple of her friends decided to call it a night and head home. Even though he himself was absolutely palatic, drunk and out of his mind, Filip offered to give them all a lift, and they accepted. 4 people, including Martina and Filip, all piled into his little Polo, and he was described as driving like a madman. He was speeding, driving erratically, his car being all over the road, and no matter how many times the passengers were telling him to pull over and to stop and to slow down, he would not listen. He drove like this with them in his car for around about 2 hours, and he actually drove so far out that they didn't even know where they were anymore. Everyone in the car would describe being terrified, and Martina especially was brought to tears with fear. When Filip eventually pulled over, Martina swung open the door and stormed out of the car. She would be followed by a furious Filip, who quickly caught up to her, grabbing her by the throat, shaking her, and then throwing her to the floor. While she was down, he leaned over her and began to assault her, but he was intercepted by the 2 other friends who came running over to see what was going on. After that, Martina point blank refused to get back in the car with Filip. She was absolutely horrified and was scared about what he was doing. However, the friends that she was with tried to reason with her. They were telling her that they were all drunk, it was dark, they were in the middle of nowhere, they had no idea where they were, and that Filip would calm down and get them all home. With this reassurance, Martina got back into the car. Almost immediately, Filip would turn to her, and I'm not going to describe exactly what he did. However, I will say that he began to indecently touch her without her consent. And she pushed him away, trying to get this man off of her and telling him to stop, he swung back his hand and slapped Martina across the face. That is when Martina pulled out a kitchen knife and stabbed Philip in the chest. With this one single stab wound, the knife would pierce his heart, which caused him to bleed to death. For whatever reason, an ambulance wasn't called. However, I did read in one report that Martina actually wanted to call an ambulance, but the people that she was with said not to. This isn't explicitly stated anywhere, but I'm gathering that they either just left Philip's body or Philip and his car somewhere, because a couple of hours later at 7 a.m, his body would be discovered. Martina ended up fleeing to her ex-boyfriend's house, where she stripped out of her clothing and cleaned the bloody knife. Only hours later, however, chewed up with guilt and eyes swollen from how much she had been crying, Martina walked into a police station and made a full confession. She had brought with her the knife that she used to stab Philip, along with the clothes that she was wearing. During the interviews with the police, she told them everything that had happened. She told them that she suffered with PTSD after what happened to her when she was 14 years old, and that she forgot that she either had the knife in her hand or had the knife on her person, that she didn't mean to stab Philip, she was only meant to punch him, and that the entire murder was an accident. At her trial in 2019, however, the jury did not believe her story of self-defense, and Martina Ognorska would be found guilty of the murder of Philip Jaskowitz. She would be handed a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum of 17 years to serve. When speaking, the judge acknowledged that Philip had, quote, undoubtedly touched you sexually and was violent to you shortly before he was killed. But they still didn't see it as an act of self-defense because she was already armed with the knife. Sources do conflict on why Martina was carrying a knife on her that evening. Some sources say that she always carried a knife on her for protection from exactly this, and others state that she got given it by a friend that evening. So far, all of Martina's appeals for a reduced sentence have been rejected, her most recent one being in May of this year. Comment down below and let me know what you think.
People are calling this the UK version of the Idaho 4 murder case. It was the 24th of July 2024 in Durley Chine Beach in Bournemouth. It was a gorgeous summer evening and two girls were just sat round enjoying the full moon by a fire. These were Amy Gray and Leanne Miles. Amy was 34 and a football coach from Poole in Dorset. She was an absolutely lovely woman, so much fun to be around, and she just had this infectious laugh. She was always having a joke around, especially with her wife Sian. The pair were just so in love and really looking forward to a future together. Now, Amy was sat round with her friend Leanne, like I said, and they were just chilling, enjoying the beach, enjoying the summer evening. It was around 11:30 p.m, so they weren't going to be out much longer anyway. Then a man suddenly appeared out of nowhere with a knife. I cannot imagine anything more terrifying than this. It was dark. They had no clue what the hell was going on. They couldn't make out who the hell this person was. And he just started slashing at them with the weapon. In an instant, the night just went from relaxed and chilled to sheer horror. And there was obviously a huge commotion. I mean, these girls were screaming and trying to run for their lives. This man stabbed Leanne multiple times, and Amy was just trying desperately to grab him off her. Leanne managed to struggle free and try and run across the sand, but the man grabbed her again. By this point, he'd frantically stabbed Amy too, 10 times. She lay lifeless on the beach, bleeding to death, as this man ran forward and lunged at Leanne. Now, thankfully, by some miracle, two men did happen to be walking by at this point, and they did intervene. They grabbed the man off Leanne, and she was just clinging on to life. She had 20 stab wounds, but miraculously managed to pull through. But tragically, it was too late for Amy. One minute she was enjoying a summer evening with her friend, and the next she was dead. And in the chaos, the attacker managed to flee. He turned out to be criminology student Nassan Sadi, aged just 21. Now, I guess people are comparing this to the Idaho 4 case because this guy was obsessed with crime, but this was more than just an interest. It was more than just something he was studying. He was constantly asking lecturers weird questions. He even once asked a lecturer how to get away with murder, and she'd actually joked back to him like, "Are you thinking of committing one?" He attended the University of Greenwich, and behind the scenes he'd been harbouring a dangerous obsession. He'd been collecting knives and researching where to commit the perfect murder. He'd strangely been researching whether pebbles are easier to run on than sand, and which hotels had CCTV. he'd repeatedly visited that specific beach and surveyed it. Now, this reminded me of the Stephen Paddock case that I did cover on my podcast, when Stephen Paddock went to Vegas and was staying in a hotel and was like surveying the area before he did his mass attack. Nassen seemed to also be looking online to get kind of inspiration, I guess, from previous murders. He'd actually looked into the Brianna Jai murder online, which again I covered on my podcast, an incredibly harrowing knife murder. Police found that he'd also recently been to see the Strangers film too. Now, I don't know whether you guys think there is any coincidence there, whether this was just a guy interested in horror films, or was he looking for inspiration? Turned out armed police did manage to thankfully track him down and later stormed his house and handcuffed him. And even in the body cam footage, it just absolutely enraged me because he's just so nonchalant. His motive for the killings was found to be just literally because he kept getting rejected by girls. And over time, he just developed this rage towards women. Now, he would later claim in court that this was a case of mistaken identity and they had the wrong guy, but obviously it wasn't. A jury did find him guilty after a 9-day trial, and he got life with a minimum of 39 years.
She was promised candy, but then was dumped in a landfill. 3-year-old Camille McKinney was from Birmingham, Alabama, and while her mother was pregnant with her, she referred to her as her little cupcake girl, so she would often go by the name Cupcake. When she was born, she had these beautiful big brown eyes, full cheeks, contagious smile. She was always wearing colorful clips and bows, and although she was tiny, she was very mighty. On October 12th of 2019, April, who was Cupcake's mother, went to her cousin's house, and she also brought Cupcake along with her so she could play with her cousin, who was super close in her age. April and her cousin got lost in conversation while the sun was setting and the children were still outside playing. Cupcake's older brother was also at this cousin's house, and when he went inside, April told him to go get Cupcake so that they could head home. As April was trying to wrap up her conversation with her cousin, Cupcake's older brother came in through the door screaming that Cupcake was gone. Police arrived to the apartment complex that Cupcake was last seen at, and they had an important witness, an 11-year-old boy who was also playing outside. The boy claimed he saw a blue SUV pull up. They convinced the toddlers to go towards the car, which was Cupcake and her cousin, with the promise of candy, but they ended up snatching Cupcake and driving away. Luckily, there was surveillance cameras in the area, so they were able to get a photo of the car and put it all over the news. Just 2 days after Cupcake's kidnapping, a viewer submitted an anonymous tip to the police about the whereabouts of that blue SUV. They were able to locate the vehicle, and it took them to an apartment complex, and that's when they found out that it belonged to Patrick Stallworth and his girlfriend Derek Brown, but there wasn't enough evidence that they were actually responsible for this. As a result, police ended up arresting Patrick because they found inappropriate photos of children on his phone, and Derek was placed in handcuffs because she had brought her 3 children to this apartment complex without permission, and it was met as a kidnapping charge. On October 21st of 2019, the girlfriend Derek ended up talking to police and told them that Cupcake's body could be found in a landfill nearby. Searchers were looking for hours, and eventually someone found a doll-like figure, and it ended up being 3-year-old Camille Cupcake McKinney. Cupcake's autopsy revealed she was given substances and forced to perform sexual acts on Patrick. Patrick and Derek pled not guilty, but all the jurors knew that they were guilty, and they were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Each year on Cupcake's birthday, her family members and members of the community all get together to celebrate her short life.
Do you notice anything strange about this photo? It was late summer 2023 and Connor and Betty Bowman were living in Minnesota. On the outside looking in, they had the perfect life. They were both in their early 30s, they had well-paid jobs, and they had a really cute dog. What more could you want? Betty worked as a pharmacist and so was obviously super intelligent, but she was also really full of life, super vibrant and outgoing. And Connor had a very similar job actually. He specialized in poison science. Again, very intelligent and knew his stuff. The pair had been married since 2021 and they were actually a little unconventional in their relationship, no judgment, but they were like, we want to be committed to each other here, but we also want to kind of explore other things on the side. So they had this kind of open relationship situation. And I don't know what you guys think, but I do think it definitely takes a certain type of personality to be in a relationship like this. You certainly need to both have really good communication and make sure you're on the same page. Now that month, suddenly and very unexpectedly, Betty started getting really horrible symptoms. She was feeling sick, feeling faint, rushing to the toilet every 5 minutes. So she got taken into hospital. She was just really, really unwell. And the doctors had never seen anything like it. They couldn't put their finger on why she'd just suddenly, out of the blue, gone really downhill. Something was wrong with her heart. She had fluid buildup in her lungs. She even had to have part of her colon removed. And horrifically, 4 days later, she was dead. Medics were like, we've only seen cases this bad where someone's been poisoned. Her friends were understandably absolutely devastated, but they were like, we actually need to speak to police because we've got some information. Betty had told them that the night before her husband had given her a smoothie and it was so gross, it tasted so horrible that she was sick. And that was a little bit weird because Connor, the husband, never mentioned that to anybody in the hospital or the police when they were questioning him. He actually was going around telling people that she had a rare autoimmune disease and that's what killed her. Everyone else was like, sorry, what autoimmune disease? Connor was also acting super weird. He seemed to want to get everything done in a hurry. He was like, don't bother with an autopsy. We just want to get her cremated. I don't want her to be kind of sat round as like a body. And get this, just days before she'd even died, he was Google searching the term widow, asking if it was gender neutral. The word started to spread about Connor and how this open relationship actually might have started to cause issues within the relationship. Betty apparently found out that Connor was not only seeing another girl, but had also got feelings for this woman. She was like, that goes against the rules that we set about this open relationship. We were very clear. We are married to each other. We're committed to each other. Yes, we can have little things on the side, but there's no feelings involved. It seemed though Connor had disregarded this and totally got invested in another person. And the widow thing wasn't the only wild Google search that he made around the time of his wife's death. Before she even went into hospital, he'd Googled her weight and researched what the exact dosage of a gout medicine would be to be fatal. And guess what she was found to have in her system? Now, he also asked Google whether Google searches could be used against you in court. I hate to break it to you, Connor, they can. And a friend of Connor's actually even came forward to police to be like, I know I'm this guy's friend and I kind of shouldn't really be telling you this, but something doesn't sit right with me. Actually told me that he was going to get $500,000 after his wife died because of a life insurance payout. So everything was stacking up against Connor, obviously, and he was arrested 2 months after his wife's death. He's currently awaiting trial for murder, but I'm interested, what do you guys think? Is there a potential innocent explanation for all of this? To me, it just freaks me out that I definitely wouldn't be able to tell by this photo that there was anything wrong with this couple, and it just goes to show you don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
A Utah mom and her 3 young children were recently found shot to death inside of a parked car in a small community, and it's just been labeled a murder-suicide. Here's everything we know. Last Tuesday at around 9:47 p.m., the Weber County Sheriff's Office were called to a home in West Haven after someone found 4 of their family members dead inside of a parked car. Upon arriving, police found the bodies of 32-year-old Mary Bella Barra and her 3 young kids, a 4-year-old boy and a 2- and 1-year-old girl. They were all shot to death and laying in the back seat of the car. Authorities did find a gun inside the car, but initially weren't sure of the circumstances of the situation. But after reviewing the neighbor's security footage, they were able to confirm that Mary Bell shot her kids before ending her own life. Police believe that this occurred either late Sunday or sometime on Monday, but their bodies weren't found until Tuesday night. I live in this community right down the road from where this happened, and all I can say is that everyone is shocked and grieving. Mary Bell was described as someone who radiated grace and kindness and was just a really bright and beautiful person. Sadly, she struggled with depression, and she was reportedly overwhelmed by the hopelessness. But her family had no idea that she was struggling mentally until all of this happened. By all accounts, she seemed just like a happy and loving mom, and they had no idea what was to come. Mary Bell had recently lost her mom in April, so I'm sure she was struggling with that, and she had just moved back in with her dad. The Weber County Sheriff's Office states that the kid's father was interviewed, and at this point they are certain that no one else was involved. A memorial is started on the front porch of the home where the family was found, and what's absolutely heartbreaking is the fact that you can still see the kids' chalk drawings outside as you drive by. Please keep this family and the community in your thoughts, and if you're struggling, please reach out to someone and get help. Nobody wants you gone, and nobody wants something like this to happen again.
It's just come out that this former NFL player has been missing for 6 months. This is an incredibly strange case. It came out a day or so that Sam Beal, who used to play for the New York Giants, hasn't actually been seen since last summer. He was an incredibly successful athlete. He played for the Giants from 2018 to 2021. He's only 29 years old, and at the time he'd apparently just agreed to borrow his girlfriend's car for the day. He had dropped her off at work in Michigan as normal, and that was the last time she ever saw him. He then appears to have driven across the country and ended up at Virginia Beach, which is odd in itself. Like, why would you drive all that way? He didn't tell anyone that that was his plan. It's very odd. But here's where it gets really eerie. That same car that he had borrowed was then found at Virginia Beach, totally abandoned. And inside were Sam's socks and shoes. Now, I don't know if this is relevant to the disappearance. It very well could be, but his shoes and socks were found in the passenger footwell of the car, and there was sand in there. I don't know what that could mean. He'd not taken anything else with him, like he didn't have a big bag or anything to suggest that he was gonna go on a road trip or stay somewhere for an extended period of time. It makes no sense. Now, his older sister has posted online, "We've done everything we could on our end to piece things together, and at this point we're in desperate need of support on all ends. I'm not here to answer a bunch of whys and hows. I just need this to land in the right direction to gain some form of answers or closure."
This is the story of Helen Ford. In the spring of 2013, Chicago, Illinois, 8-year-old Giselle Ford is placed in temporary custody of her grandmother, Helen Ford. Now, this stemmed from an ongoing custody battle from her parents, Andre Ford and Sandra Mercado. Andre claimed that Sandra wasn't providing a suitable house home for their daughter. He said that she was homeless and she wasn't getting Giselle to school on time. Now, Sandra debunked these claims and said that it was all a lie. Her, Giselle, and her newborn lived with her father. Sandra also said that Andre hasn't even seen Giselle in 12 months. With all this back and forth, and he said, she said, this is when Helen stepped up and said that she will be the responsible adult and take in Giselle. The judge said, she raised 11 children, she got a clean household. Okay, all right. She seemed like a devoted grandmother. On November 20th, 2012, Helen went to go pick Giselle up from school with a court order, so they had no choice but to hand Giselle over to her. And, Giselle is crying at this point. She don't want to go with these people. She will now be living with her grandmother, Helen, and her father, Andre, who is now bedbound due to his chronic illness. Giselle's energy changed quickly after moving in with them. The neighbors noticed that she wasn't outside playing like she used to. Her teacher said that she had become quiet and distant. She had even started falling asleep in class. Her grandfather, who she was just living with, was allowed to visit her. And when he would visit her, she just wasn't the same bubbly child that he was used to. And he noticed that she was also looking skinny. When he asked Helen about Giselle's weight, she said that she stopped giving her sugar because it was bad for kids. Now, he didn't believe this at all, but nevertheless, him and Sandra still was trying to regain custody of her. But we all know that that be taking a while. But because this was a temporary custody, DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services, are required to do home visits. And their initial home visit, now this apartment was supposed to be suitable or fit to raise Giselle in, but baby, it wasn't. It was tiny, it was cluttered, it was poorly maintained, trash everywhere, and it was even infested with roaches. All of this was documented, but nothing was ever done. Helen and Andre also accused Sandra's boyfriend of sexually abusing Giselle. This required for medical evaluation, but by the time that the referral went through, Giselle was with these two for 7 months, taking us to June 2013. During the examination, the doctor noted marks, abrasions, scabs, loop-shaped bruises, all mainly on the thigh and buttock area, all signs associated with physical trauma, but he deemed them non-specific. He said that all of these injuries were self-inflicted, which is crazy, and he did not report it to DCF. But I guess DCFS wouldn't have made a difference, because that same month, when they went to their household again, Giselle had blood around her mouth and open sores on her body. But with Helen's explanation, They believed it.